Hey everybody, welcome back to the Lunch and Learn webinar video series for the book Meaning Making, the 8 Values that Drive America's Newest Generations. I'm your host, Dr. Josh Packard, Executive Director of Springtide Research Institute. And I have, as always with me today is Ellen Connick, our head writer.
Hello.
Ellen and I had a great time working on this book. It was super revealing to get a chance to sort of dig into sort of like, what are the motivations behind the decisions that young people make when they're deciding where to work, where to volunteer, what religious groups they want to be associated with.
Yeah.
Because it turns out, right, Ellen, that like the factors that go into these decisions are different than they have ever been.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think that the value that we want to talk about today is being impactful. And this actually, like, this makes perfect sense. I feel like this is one of those values that when you think of this generation, you're like, oh yeah, this is unsurprising. This is totally what this generation cares about. You see it in all of their actions. And that's one of the important things too about this emerging generation is they're looking to live like fully integrated lives, not practice this value at home, practice this value at work. Like at home, I'm nice. At work, I'm like, you know, a real like ambitious and cruel or so. Like, no, they're trying to be who they are all the time in every space they occupy and every club they join. And so this is a huge one for this generation. Is
such a good point. And I think a lot of people listening to this might, especially if you're older, you might think like, well, I wanted to live an impactful life too. I did so, we think about different protests and movements throughout time, but I think the difference here is that those protests and movements don't just happen on like protest and movement time. Young people are expecting to get to do that kind of work, whatever they consider to be impactful. They're trying to do it in every, like all throughout their day, every day. But before we get too far into that, this is a lunch and learn. We hope that you're lunching alongside of us.
We do.
Ellen and I are lunching. Ellen, what are you eating?
Reheated coffee.
Nice.
It's just, this is how the afternoons go and there's no shame in it. And then I'm having a cream cheese and tomato sandwich. I actually ate a lot of it. Josh was having some technical difficulties and I was not waiting to eat my lunch during that.
And this is making a repeat appearance. You're into the cream cheese and tomato sandwiches.
I think I may have eaten it on another episode. It's very fresh and refreshing for summer.
It's on my list. I've got pasta with Parmesan, a cheese stick because I have a 10-year-old in the house. And
we have cheese sticks because of a 30-something husband in my house, but that's fine.
And strawberry soup. Have you ever had strawberry soup?
No. Is it just yogurt? Like it looks like yogurt in a bowl.
It's not. It is soup.
It's strawberry soup. Okay.
You can. It's only really like, I mean, for a variety of reasons, like some ethical, environmental, but also like for affordability, because it takes so many strawberries. It's really only something that we make in the summer. It's great, and it's like if you put it in the freezer, it's like borderline ice cream, and you can make it with almost no sugar.
Is it just mashed up strawberries, or is there something else going on in the soup?
No, you can make it as fancy as you want, but I mean, at a basic, it's strawberries and then like some plain vanilla yogurt or some plain yogurt and apple juice typically, but that gets really acidic. So, I mean, this is cooking now with Ellen and Josh.
Our next series, tune in. I think
for us, this really great book called Simply in Season. So it helps us to it's like recipes organized by season. And so it keeps us like eating locally, eating seasonally.
That's very cool.
And not getting stuck in ruts of the same stuff over and over again, like just a million tomato and cream cheese sandwiches or something.
If it does the trick,
Okay, Ellen, so like we're going to get to environmentalism actually in a little bit, because that's a big part of like one of the core concerns about how to be impactful and live an impactful life here. But before we get to that example, I mean, it's worth unpacking what this means, because impactful can be a fairly nebulous term.
Like we can have an impact on anything. Like I have an impact on, the grass I walk on is being impacted by my feet. This is not, we don't mean it like, so, okay, what we mean by impactful is twofold. There's two parts of this. It's doing good and it's avoiding harm. It's basically like a conscientiousness even about how you or your organization are impacting the world in both positive and negative ways. And it's a commitment to increasing and like kind of buffing up those positive ways any way you can, and decreasing any harm. So it requires lots of reflection. This is a super, super reflective value, because Like you can be super committed to like doing good in the world. Like you're a justice organization and you're fighting on behalf of a marginalized group or community. But if you're, like using so much paper that your, jungles are getting cut down so that you can print, like there's something off balance about your impact. And not everybody has to care about every social issue by any means, but being impactful just means being super aware so that you can start to limit harm and do as much good, produce as much good. And this is so valuable to young people. Like we're seeing this, I think it's more true now, like more vividly felt now than it was even when we were writing the book. Like even when we were talking about this value in the first place, I think it's increased in its intensity.
I agree. It's, in many ways that like do good and minimize harm reminds me of what has emerged since we finished writing, which was the George Floyd protests and the turn towards, which is not controversial at all for young people in general, which is this notion of not just being not a racist, but being anti-racist, right? That there isn't really this middle ground for young people when it comes to many of these issues anymore, that's sort of eroding. And they expect that from their organization. So one of the key survey findings here from the chapter is that half of the young people we surveyed said that organizations have an actual responsibility to contribute good to the world.
Yes. I think this is a stunning statistic because this means like your brand, your church, your, printer company, like you, like whatever your business,
your campus group, your campus.
Yeah, your campus. Yeah, actually, so part of what we do in this book is we open and close with a narrative that comes from the real life of a young person who's grappling with or searching for or trying to embody a value. And in this case, we're actually talking about a school that like is eco-conscious, like is trying to like become a space where like eco-conscientiousness is encouraged, where like, protests or marches are part of the daily curriculum. Like, and so there's like really no institution or organization is left out of that call to do good in the world. Even if, and this is, I think, a really important part, your normal work, your normal daily work or activity as a group might be good. The expectation is that you're doing good even outside your normal lane. Like you're not just doing good, like I have a really good product that will help people, but you're also doing good, like, and whenever we sell this product, we're going to donate this. Like that's above and beyond sort of just the typical lane you're already in.
And we've seen companies already having success with those kinds of models now for quite some time. And I think part of what we do in this chapter is help to lay it out in a way that so that people can understand why those things are resonating and having a certain amount of success. Like it goes beyond something that's sort of like, oh, what a unique marketing angle, right? Like it's working because it is actually maybe accidentally, maybe on purpose, but is in lockstep with where values are headed. Especially for young people. And, this can present all kinds of challenges. I mean, I think even at Springtide, what we are trying to do is to be seen as, and not just be seen as, but to actually be objective, incredible experts in the lives of young people. And we have loads of internal discussions around like, all right, so there's this social issue. Is this our issue to engage with? Like, do we need to be, are we in the right place? If there is no neutral, like how are we carving out the right lane and the right space for our voice without undercutting sort of what our overall objective is as an organization? And it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And some of the examples that we highlight in the book are like, they're really interesting because they're specifically doing this self-reflection and this work to try to say like, okay, here's our main goal as an organization or a group, but here's what we're doing. Like, here's where we see ourselves being invited into doing more and better. That's maybe not our typical lane. And one of the organizations that we talk about is a church in Vermont. And it's a Lutheran church. And they're just like, they're a church. Like that's what they're doing. They're building community and worshiping on Sunday mornings. And like, that's what we think of when we think of church. Right. But they started a watershed discipleship ministry. They're like doing care for the earth is a huge part of what their church identity is. And it started because there was a need locally.
Which I think is key.
Yes, I completely agree. That's such a huge part of discerning what that new space of social impact a person or an organization might take on is like, what does this community need of me? Where's the
Right.
need? Either how can I reduce harm that I'm creating, or where is a need in my community I can contribute good to? And this organization, like this church, I think it's so cool because they have their main thing they do, but this secondary thing isn't secondary because it's also drawing in the community deeper and drawing new people into it because it's a new access point.
Right.
And I just think that's super exciting. This is especially important because over 70% of the young people in this survey said that it's really important that the organizations they choose to participate in work intentionally towards sustainability in their decisions and actions. Like environmentalism and eco concerns are so important.
It's
this
one
generation
of the
is
most clear connections between being impactful and a particular issue, for sure.
Yep, exactly.
Well, Ellen, I want to take a break here because I want, as we've been talking about, or as we've referred to, I've been recording these podcast episodes and for season 2 of the Voices of Young People around each chapter. And we've got, I want to play a snippet or a snippet, is that? I want to play a section of a podcast from one of the young people talking about why it's so, important that organizations aren't trying to remain neutral and how it's almost sort of impossible to do so if you really want to, enable and empower young people to be a part of your organization in an impactful way.
Yeah.
So let's pause here and we'll come back and talk about it.
Sounds good.
I think one thing that I thought a lot about was also just being part of communities that have like-minded individuals who also want to make that impact. So not just leadership, but having peers who want to do that same work is really motivating and helps you build connections, network, and then also have a bigger impact because there's more people doing the work. So I think that's really important. And then going back to something you said earlier too about groups can focus maybe more on one or two issues that they feel best suited to address. And I think that's great. But they can also then connect to other organizations who are working in other areas and kind of build this larger movement to make sure that all issues are being addressed in an impactful way.
Oh, I just every time I hear these interviews and get a chance to it's one thing when I'm doing them and I feel like it's like I'm trying to both do the interview and manage all the technology, but then when I get a chance to go back and listen to them again, it's always just like fireworks. I love, hearing young people talk about these things in their own words. And one of the things that Eilidh does there is point out so astutely about you don't have to, you can try to remain neutral, basically, but not if you want me. Right.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that.
It's such a key point that young people are not only expecting organizations to do this, but they're expecting that they can live and are going to find ways that they're going to create new things if the things aren't there that will allow them to live an impactful life in all aspects of what they do. The sort of, we talked a lot about this in the other across all the episodes, but that transactional nature of life seems to be sort of eroding. I do this thing over here so that I can live my best life over here. That's going away, and there's really, I think there's clear reasons for that, which is as our social institutions sort of don't hold up the way that they've been promised to hold up for people, especially younger generations are like, well, I'm not gonna, if I can't count on them. As one young person told me a while ago, this wasn't for this project, it was for a different one, but they said, if they're not going to do anything for me, I'm going to make sure that they can't do anything to me. And so, which is such a powerful statement. And it was really this moment of oh, right. That's why you're insisting that you get to live out all these values in the places where you're already going, because you don't think that they're not going to necessarily enable you to be able to do that forever or even for the foreseeable future.
And I think too, this generation has keenly experienced the ways that institutions and organizations that we had an assumption, a societal assumption that they're virtuous until proven otherwise. That something like big banks, trust in banks is low, and this makes sense after the 2008 recession. But there was this kind of cultural expectation banks are your friend. Give banks your money, and I'm not saying don't give banks your money. I'm saying that makes sense that there's this implicit distrust. And we've talked about this before too. You have to earn this generation, you have to earn their commitments, their participation, their membership. They're full opting into your group has to be earned. It's not a given that then you lose. It's like, if you don't pass this test, I'm just not interested,
Right.
you know?
And one of the ways that seems to, like, one of the threads that runs, through all these different values is this turn away from those big monoliths and towards things that are, more local, more personable, more sort of like micro in some ways. So that, like, if you even this impactful, value, we're not talking about, like, the young people that we've been hearing from are not talking about, like, as much as they're engaged in human rights or environmental movements or Black Lives Matter or whatever it is at the national level, but they're thinking about it through a very local lens.
Yeah, actually, so I'm based in St. Paul, Minnesota, where a lot of the like the protests and the aftermath of the death of George Floyd have like come out of this space. And I just saw like through various social media channels that Minnesota just got, but in Minneapolis, its first Black-owned bookstore. And that's really, really cool, because like in the wake of all of these protests, people are like, okay, let me try to wrap my head around what racism is and how anti-racism works. And part of that decision is also like, I'm not going to buy this book from Amazon, though. I'm going to try to actually, in the very concrete gesture, buy from a local Black bookstore or from a Black author on this topic. Like, it's these layers of support, not just I want to understand an idea, but I want to be conscious about who I'm paying for this idea, and like whose voice I'm listening to describing the idea.
And we saw that come up even in that church example that you gave.
Yes.
And I think that this is the place to start, right? Is like, what does, if you're trying to figure out, like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure that we do this. How can we, do this? It seems like starting at a place where it's like, what does my community need?
Yeah. What's the local need is a huge part of social impact. Like, one organization can't be like, okay, it's my job to like save the planet in XYZ way. But it's like, okay, we have a waterfront business. How can we reduce waste into the water systems? Like, or how can we do like, monthly cleanups at the local lake or river? So whatever is near you, whether it's environmental, whether it's like marginalized groups in your community, if it's like people aren't having access to resources, including your resources, like, just what's that very near step. I think that's the best way to think about impact. And I think, the church example is a perfect one, because it's right outside their door, just literally. And it's a helpful exercise to just think, what's right outside my door. Like, that's one way of just expanding your thinking about impact.
Which is also super, I think, empowering, because it means that, like, especially if you're a small organization, it means that you don't have to be thinking about yourself as responsible for taking on the problems of the entire world just to attract, 19-year-olds to your organization. That impact can be, and in many ways, I think the data suggests that it should be done at this very local level. I mean, so years ago, I was doing some work with a speaking engagement with a church, talking about national trends and religious affiliation. And I said, look, if your congregation could be picked up and moved across town and basically function the same, you're on a downward trend. Like, that's just not the kind of place that future generations of churchgoers are going to want to attend. And then, like, fast forward a couple of years, and I'm talking about like young people at this conference which is filled with all kinds of different experts, and I hear this guy up on stage giving this keynote, and he says, if you've picked up your business and moved it someplace just for the tax breaks, and your business can basically operate the same no matter what city it's in, across the country, then your business is not going to be competitive for young people. And I was like, this is the same thing.
This is real. This is a coherent reality. Like, this is really happening across every single level.
Right. Yeah. Well, Ellen, thank
really
you
interesting.
for these concrete examples and for being with us today. We've got a whole series of these, one for every chapter. You can find the book on our website at springtideresearch.org. Follow us on social media at We Are Springtide. We'll link to those things in the show notes here for this. Otherwise, I hope you all have a chance to go and look up strawberry soup.
I'm gonna Google it right now,
because it's
and
not
then
just
maybe make it later.
It's not just yogurt.
I'm glad to know that. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you later.